The Peterson family's life seemed picture perfect, but a shocking revelation was about to tear their world apart. When a DNA test unveiled that the housemaid's baby wasn't just an innocent addition to their household, but was deeply connected to their family's darkest secrets, everything changed. Trust dissolved, accusations flew, and relationships crumbled under the weight of the truth. The once tight-knit family found themselves questioning everything they knew about love, loyalty, and betrayal. How far could one secret go to destroy a family, and could the pieces ever be put back together again? This is a story of heartbreak, redemption, and the undeniable power of truth that will leave you speechless. It was a calm evening in the spacious living room of the Peterson household. The large windows framed a picturesque sunset, but inside the atmosphere was heavy, oppressive even. At the center of it all was a small white envelope sitting on the coffee table, its contents threatening to upend the lives of everyone in the room. Margaret Peterson, the matriarch, sat on the edge of her seat, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a glass of water. Across from her, her husband Richard avoided her gaze, his face pale and his shoulders tense. Their eldest son, Jacob, stood leaning against the wall, his arms crossed in a display of defiance, while their teenage daughter, Clara, sat on the floor, nervously picking at the hem of her sweater. Beside the family, almost out of place, stood Rosa, the housemaid, with her baby cradled in her arms. Her face was a mixture of fear and quiet dignity as she rocked the infant gently, trying to soothe the child's soft whimpers. The baby's cries, though faint, seemed to echo through the room, amplifying the tension that had reached a breaking point. Margaret finally broke the silence. Her voice was low, but filled with emotion. "Are you going to open it, Richard? Or are we all just going to sit here pretending this isn't happening?" Richard hesitated, his hand hovering over the envelope. He knew that whatever was inside would change everything. Slowly, he picked it up, his fingers fumbling as he tore the seal. The room seemed to hold its breath as he unfolded the paper and read the results of the DNA test. His eyes scanned the page, and his face fell, confirming everyone's worst fears. He looked up, his eyes locking with Margaret's. "It's true," he whispered. "The baby is mine." The glass in Margaret's hand slipped, shattering on the floor. Clara let out a soft gasp, while Jacob pushed off the wall, his face a mask of anger. Rosa stood frozen, holding her baby closer, as though shielding the child from the weight of the revelation. "How could you?" Margaret's voice cracked, a mixture of disbelief and fury. "How could you betray me like this? Our family? Everything we've built?" Richard opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could he possibly say to justify the inexcusable? His affair with Rosa had been a mistake, a brief lapse in judgment. But now that mistake was staring him in the face, a living, breathing reminder of his betrayal. Jacob stepped forward, his voice laced with venom. "Is this what you call being a father? You lecture me about responsibility and integrity, and yet you do this." He gestured toward Rosa and the baby, his words cutting through the air like a knife. Rosa, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. "I never asked for any of this. I didn't want to hurt your family. But I had to think about my child. She deserves to know her father." Margaret turned to Rosa, her eyes blazing. "You knew he was married. You knew he had a family. And yet, you went ahead anyway." Rosa met her gaze, unflinching. "I made a mistake too, but this isn't just about me or him. This is about her." She glanced down at her baby, who had fallen asleep in her arms, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around her. Clara, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice wavering. "What happens now? Are we just supposed to accept this?" "Accept her?" Margaret shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, I won't accept this. I can't. Richard, if you want to keep this child in your life, then you'll have to do it without me." Richard's heart sank. He looked at Margaret, his wife of 20 years, the woman who had stood by his side through thick and thin. He looked at his children, who now saw him as a stranger, a man they could no longer respect. And then he looked at Rosa and the baby, the innocent life caught in the crossfire of his mistakes. "I don't want to lose my family," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't turn my back on her either. She's my daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Margaret rose from her seat, her movements slow and deliberate. "Then you've made your choice." She turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Jacob followed her, his face hard and unreadable. Clara hesitated, glancing between her father and the baby before running after her mother. The room was silent once more, save for the soft rustle of the baby's breathing. Richard turned to Rosa, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I've ruined everything." Rosa shook her head. "It's not just your fault. We both made choices, and now we have to live with them." Over the next few weeks, the Peterson household was a shadow of its former self. Margaret moved into the guest room, barely speaking to Richard, except when necessary. Jacob and Clara avoided their father altogether, their once close bond fractured beyond repair. Rosa, meanwhile, faced her own challenges. The other staff members at the Peterson estate treated her with disdain, whispering behind her back and making her feel like an outcast. She considered leaving, but where would she go? She had no family, no support system, and now a baby to care for. One day, Margaret confronted Rosa in the kitchen. "I want you to leave," she said bluntly. Rosa looked up, her expression weary. "And go where? This is my home too. I've worked here for years. I have nowhere else to go." Margaret's voice softened, but her resolve remained firm. "I'll give you enough money to start over. You and the baby deserve a chance at a better life, but it can't be here." Rosa considered the offer. It was tempting, but she knew that leaving wouldn't solve everything. The child would still be Richard's daughter, and that connection couldn't be erased. "I'll leave," Rosa said finally, "but I won't take your money. I'll figure it out on my own." As Rosa packed her things, Richard tried to convince her to stay. "You don't have to do this," he said. "We can figure out a way to make this work." But Rosa shook her head. "Staying here will only make things worse. For everyone." With her baby in her arms and a small suitcase in hand, Rosa left the Peterson estate, walking away from the chaos and into an uncertain future. Years passed, and the Peterson family slowly began to heal. Margaret and Richard divorced, but they maintained a civil relationship for the sake of their children. Jacob and Clara eventually forgave their father, though their relationship would never be the same. As for Rosa, she found a small apartment in the city and started a new life. She worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter, who grew into a bright, curious child with her father's eyes. One day, Richard reached out to Rosa, asking to see his daughter. Rosa hesitated, but eventually agreed, knowing that the child deserved to know her father. When Richard met his daughter for the first time, he was overcome with emotion. He vowed to be a part of her life, to make up for the mistakes of the past. The reunion was bittersweet, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter for everyone involved. The past couldn't be undone, but they could all move forward, carrying the lessons they had learned along the way. And as the years went on, the Peterson family learned that while trust could be broken, it could also be rebuilt.